Welcome back to the Budget Gamer channel, where we bring you critical and in-depth reviews of just about every indie game we can get our hands on, and today we're going to be taking a look at SuperBrothers Sword and Sworcery EP for the Nintendo Switch. And if you haven't heard of this game before, you should. Not only because it actually came out in 2011, but just now made its way to the Switch, but because it's also a pretty solid point-and-click title. Starting off with the story, though, you are playing as a Scythian wanderer, for all the things that could possibly mean, because I don't honestly know. But what you do know is that your main guide that you're working with is some sort of trans-dimensional being that really seems to know a lot more about what's going on than you do. And your mission, should you have the ability to deny it, is to collect the Megatome and try and subdue and capture each of the 3 pieces of the Trigon. And as you make your way through the game's several very distinctly divided chapters, you'll find out that every single phase in this adventure journey comes with its own fair amount of misfortunes and woe. And yes, most of them will be due exactly to the things that you're doing as the main character. But as you play through the game with this mysterious burden of having to collect the Megatome and reunite it with the Trigon, whatever that might be, very early in gameplay you will obtain the Megatome and unlock one of its abilities to grant you insights into the minds of people and animals, which will let you real-time hear their thoughts. Of course, take real-time with a grain of salt because it, after all, is a video game. But not only that, you'll be granted the unique power to interact with the game's soundscape. And it's these 2 elements, or I should say primarily these 2 elements, that will act as your source of information and hints for where the puzzles might be or how to solve them, and how to interact with the game's puzzles themselves. Putting together little bits and pieces from each of the game's characters for what they might be thinking in certain situations will probably cue you into what you should be doing next and where and when to do it. But as a game that primarily revolves around indie progressive rock and even calls itself an EP, and for those of you who are younger than 30 or 35 years old, that means extended play and refers to a full-size vinyl record. So you can expect that the sound portfolio of the game is one of its integral features, not just for sound effects and soundtrack. Being able to interact through sound with the environment of the game, most of the puzzles will revolve around appeasing certain sprites or spirits found all throughout the native environment. And whether you're managing to make them happy by leading some ducklings back to their mama or by polishing the banded colors of a rainbow in the sky, every single spirit you can find and appease will grant you some bit of boon toward the world itself, and hopefully give you just that much more of an edge for universal karma when trying to subdue each portion of the Trigon, because it doesn't exactly go too willingly into your back pocket. But as narrative-based games, and especially point-and-click games, are all completely wrapped up in the puzzles and the discovery of the mystery, I really don't want to go into any more of it than that, because otherwise the game mechanics are pretty straightforward. Looking at the presentation for SuperBrothers Sword and Sworcery EP, though, I mean, that is one game that really stands out. And at least visually, with its unique blend of high and lo-fi graphics and the absolutely gorgeous background scenery, I was immediately called back to an all but forgotten genre of gaming known as the cinematic platformer. And if you have played other games like The Way Remastered or The Eternal Castle, or even further back, Another World, then you probably already know exactly what I'm talking about, and good on you, mad props for knowing about such cool games. And I am happy to say that, obviously, a game that revolves around sound has a really great soundtrack, and that the sound effects in the game are so well done. Because they don't just extend to minor background nuance, such as a bunny jumping through some hedges and making a little twinkling sound. The sound portfolios in Sword and Sworcery actually affect absolutely everything in the game. And to a point, it started to remind me of another game called Oxenfree. And if you haven't played that one, another really awesome point-and-click title. And that is because the entire game is a sound experience, making really great use of stereo sound effects as you pass by certain artifacts, but also in establishing the pace and the timing and even the style of combat within the game. And once you notice it, it is really gratifying and very satisfying. But outside of the absolutely praiseworthy presentation for Sword and Sworcery, there are actually a couple of things a player might want to be aware of before diving in. And first and foremost is that as of the time of the recording of this review, it is on sale for like nothing. I think I got it for $1 or so, and that makes it totally worth it for a 5 to 6 hour adventure. But that being said, the first thing of note is kind of like its graphic presentation. There is a lot of old school influence in this game. And that means that unlike a lot of more modern point-and-click indies that are currently flooding the eShop, even though it is kind of a scene-by-scene puzzle environment, it will require a lot of player intuition. Things won't be so straightforward as you might have become accustomed to. And so there are points where you might find yourself actually wanting to look at a walkthrough. But if you're in it for the story and not necessarily to forcefully dominate each puzzle with your raw brain power, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Otherwise, though, there are two things that did stand out to me about SuperBrothers Sword and Sworcery, and one of them is actually the controller layout. As a pretty much religiously console gamer, even though I did have my stint in the PC world, I became very, very accustomed to character control being the left thumbstick, and especially in point-and-click titles or twin-stick shooters or even 3D platformers, the rest of everything is handled with the right thumbstick. And that is actually swapped in Sword and Sworcery, and other than going into the Nintendo Switch console settings, there's really no way to change it. And it did take me almost till the end of my playthrough to actually finally get used to that. But the very last thing to note, and this is really nitpicky, and I'm very aware, but it's the main character's walking speed. As Sword and Sworcery does require a lot of player intuition, there will be a lot of back and forthing to try and figure out what the next detail is or what tiny thing you may have missed or misread to find or solve that puzzle to move the game stage forward. And so after 2 or 3 hours in this significantly beautiful game world, you might start to wish you could just move a little bit faster. But again, not only is that nitpicky, but it is pretty much how that kind of cinematic platformer world works, which is another reason why I saw such a huge influence, or at least personally had such a large reminiscence toward that other forgotten genre. And so taking a step back and looking at SuperBrothers Sword and Sworcery EP as a whole experience, I'd have to say it was very, very unexpected, and it was exactly what I was hoping for and much more than I expected. Because this is another indie game that I really actually randomly found on the eShop just cruising through the sales. And even though it did come out in 2011, I had never heard of it until I just found it a couple days ago. And so if you are a fan of cinematic platformers and already find yourself drawn to the visuals, even if you're not a huge point-and-click fan, I would encourage you, especially if you can get it on the sale price, to go ahead and try it out. It might be a good way to break into the genre. Otherwise, if you're already a point-and-click fan, this is definitely a must-have and will be going on the must-have indies playlist. And so that does about bring us to the end of the review for SuperBrothers Sword and Sworcery EP, now, finally, thankfully, on the Nintendo Switch. And so if you enjoyed the review, or especially if you found it helpful, feel free to throw us a like or a comment to show your support, and don't forget to click that little bell icon when you subscribe to stay updated with the latest content. Because there are literally thousands of indie games out there, and new and unique ones are coming out every single day. And even though we can only cover a couple of indie game reviews a week, because even though I say we, it really is just me doing this, chances are that whether it's an absolute easy hard pass or an unforgettable gem, you're probably going to find out about it right here. But anyway, this has been the Budget Gamers. As always, thanks for watching.